Donna, a very different scene at the Liberal leader's first campaign stop of this election campaign in Blainville, Quebec. A contrast when you hear the cheers and clapping here to the gunfire being heard in the streets of Afghanistan tonight. A foreign policy crisis is not how any prime minister plans to start an election campaign. Today, Justin Trudeau saying that he is heartbroken by the situation in Afghanistan and vowing to continue to help the Afghan people, including 20,000 refugees he has promised to bring to Canada. But the Liberal leader was unable to provide a plan for how or when they would get out. While Canadian embassy staff have been evacuated, 100 Gurkhas approximately have been left behind, Nepalese citizens who put their lives on the line to guard the Canadian embassy. They were not approved to be on the last flight out carrying Canadians which left earlier today. Also left behind, the interpreters who worked for the Canadian Armed Forces and their families. Thousands of people, sources say, in the streets of all ages, vulnerable to the Taliban. They say they were told to come to Kabul hoping for evacuation, but now they are stranded without food, anywhere to stay, or any security. Donna, typically foreign policy issues don't play in elections, but with the sacrifices Canada has made in Afghanistan, we'll see whether or not this one is different.
This is a tense night in Afghanistan. The Taliban are back in charge after 20 years and the deaths of thousands of foreign soldiers and Afghan civilians. Thousands of Afghans are now trying to escape, fearing a return to hardline Taliban rule. Among those watching anxiously is Malala Yousafzai, who was shot in the head by a Taliban fighter because she supported girls' education. She tweeted today she's deeply worried about women, minorities, and human rights advocates. Just last month, American President Joe Biden said a Taliban takeover was not inevitable. He was completely wrong. Jennifer Johnson reports.
This is Afghanistan in chaos. The president has fled the country, his government has collapsed, and thousands of Afghans are desperately trying to escape, along with Western military and diplomatic personnel. Taliban rule is now a reality after dozens of cities have fallen, besieged by bombings and a campaign of deadly violence. U.S. military helicopters are evacuating embassy staff members to Kabul airport. It may be their only way out, with Taliban fighters now encircling Kabul after taking control of most of the country. It took less than a week after U.S. President Joe Biden announced he's pulling American troops out by August 31st. His team blaming Afghan security forces for not protecting its people.
The international community invested over 20 years, billions of dollars in these forces, 300,000 of them, with an air force. Unfortunately, tragically, they have not been able to defend the country.
A return to brutal Taliban rule is a hellish endgame for people here. Women's rights were eliminated under their control. A humanitarian disaster seems inevitable. Interpreters and support workers who've worked alongside Western allies fear they will be killed if they can't get out.
They have to take care about us. It is our turn to be helped. We help them.
Weeks ago, President Biden dismissed comparisons of this withdrawal to Americans being airlifted out of Saigon during the Vietnam War. But many Republicans briefed by White House security advisors see it differently.
You just had President Biden a few days ago saying you wouldn't see helicopters evacuating the embassy like Saigon, and yet here we are. This is President Biden's Saigon moment, and unfortunately, it was very predictable.
Thousands of Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters have been freed from prisons, and concerns about extremism both in Afghanistan and beyond are growing.
They are on the verge of having another safe haven, but this time with all of the infrastructure and military assets that we had intended for the Afghan government to use. It's terrifying.
At the presidential palace in Kabul, Taliban leaders and former President Hamid Karzai are trying to negotiate a peaceful transfer or sharing of power. But it's clear the peace so many thousands have died to ensure will not be realized in Afghanistan or for its people. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.